The first time I saw the young man, he was standing outside the palace at sunset. His clothes were worn, but he held himself with confidence, his eyes fixed on the palace as if he knew something we didn't. It was strange, he was handsome, but something about him felt unsettling. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. I knew, somehow, that he would change everything. In our kingdom, the king's daughter, Adaeze, had always been the pride of our people. She was kind, wise beyond her years, and beautiful. People traveled from distant villages to catch a glimpse of her during festivals. But last season, everything changed. Adaeze fell ill, and no one understood why. She became pale, her laughter turned to silence, and her energy faded like a candle burning out. No healer could help her, and people started whispering that she was cursed. The king, desperate and heartbroken, promised that anyone who could cure her would have a reward beyond imagination. Many healers came and went, but Adaeze only grew worse. She became so weak that she could barely lift her head. The palace grew quieter each day as if it were already mourning her. And then, just as the sun was setting on another dark day, the young man arrived. He came alone, his steps slow and deliberate. He wasn't like the other healers, dressed in fancy robes or carrying bags of herbs. He seemed ordinary. But his gaze was sharp, like he knew more than he let on. He requested an audience with the king. "I know how to cure your daughter," he said, his voice low but sure. The king looked at him with suspicion, as we all did. Who was this stranger to claim he could do what no one else had managed? But the king's hope overpowered his doubt, and he allowed the man to stay. The young man, who called himself Chima, insisted on seeing the princess alone. It was strange, but the king agreed, desperate to save his daughter. They went into her room together, and the door closed behind them. We waited outside, our ears straining to catch any sound. Hours passed, and no one dared to disturb them. When Chima finally opened the door, Adaeze was standing beside him, her face full of life again. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and she looked like herself. The king rushed forward, embracing his daughter, tears streaming down his face. The palace erupted in cheers. It was like a dream, seeing her back to her old self. But something about her smile seemed different. First, maybe. I told myself I was imagining things, just a leftover worry. But as I watched Adaeze that night, I felt a small, creeping fear that I couldn't shake. The king, grateful beyond words, asked Chima how he wanted to be rewarded. Chima looked at the king, his eyes calm, and said, "All I ask is your daughter's hand in marriage." The king's face fell. It was an unexpected request, but the law was clear. The man who saved the princess could ask for anything, and the king would be bound to grant it. The king tried to hide his reluctance, but Adaeze surprised us all by accepting the proposal with a strange eagerness. She had never shown much interest in marriage, always saying she wanted to marry for love. Yet here she was, agreeing to marry a stranger, someone none of us knew. The wedding was swift. The whole kingdom celebrated, though something about it felt off. Chima moved into the palace, and within weeks, he seemed to take over all the king's duties. He was there every time a decision needed to be made, whispering suggestions into the king's ear. And Adaeze, she stayed close to him, never leaving his side, her eyes fixed on him with a look that was almost frightened. One night, as I was passing the palace courtyard, I saw Chima standing alone, staring at the sky. I don't know why, but something urged me to hide and watch him. As I did, I noticed that he was muttering strange words under his breath, words I didn't understand. Then, he held his hands out to the sky, and the air around him grew cold. My skin prickled, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to run. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? Chima was the hero who saved the princess, and I was just a servant. As the weeks passed, I noticed other strange things happening around the palace. Food would spoil faster, flowers in the garden would wither, and the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. Adaeze grew quieter, paler, as if she were fading all over again. Chima, meanwhile, seemed more powerful, more confident. The king began to withdraw, becoming a shadow of himself, spending his days in his chamber, too weak to rule. Then, one night, I overheard Chima speaking to Adaeze. I was outside their room, carrying a tray, when I heard his voice, cold, harsh. "You belong to me now," he said. "You agreed, remember? You owe me your life." There was silence, then a quiet, frightened whisper from Adaeze. "I didn't know it would be like this. I thought you were saving me." Chima's laugh sent chills down my spine. "You thought wrong," he said. "You are mine, and soon, this entire kingdom will be mine." My hands trembled, and I nearly dropped the tray. I backed away quietly, my heart racing. I had to warn the king, but when I reached his chambers, he was already too weak to understand me. His eyes were hollow, his skin ashen, as if he were already halfway gone. The next day, Chima declared himself the new ruler, saying the king was too ill to lead. No one dared to question him. He spoke with authority, his voice commanding, and even those who had doubted him were too afraid to stand against him. But I knew the truth. I had seen what he really was. I began gathering other servants who shared my fears, those who had also noticed the changes. Together, we formed a small group, determined to find a way to stop him. But Chima seemed to sense our fear, watching us with those sharp, cold eyes. One night, Adaeze appeared at my door. Her face was pale, her eyes desperate. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to help me. I made a mistake. He isn't human." She told me everything, that when he'd entered her room to cure her, he'd made her swear to marry him, saying it was the only way to save her life. She hadn't known what she was agreeing to, hadn't realized he would become something dark and terrible. "He took something from me that night," she said, her voice barely audible. "Something that belongs to me." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she was too frightened to speak. She slipped away, her face full of sorrow, and I knew we had to act soon. We waited until midnight, gathering torches and any charms we could find. The air was thick, and every sound seemed amplified, the walls pressing in on us. We moved through the palace silently, our hearts pounding, until we reached Chima's chamber. He was waiting for us, a smile on his face. "Did you think you could get rid of me so easily?" he asked, his voice cold. "You are nothing. This kingdom is mine now, and there's nothing you can do about it." But just as he finished speaking, Adaeze appeared behind us, holding a small, ancient-looking charm. Her hands shook as she raised it toward him, her voice strong and clear. "You have no power here anymore. This charm holds your fate." Chima's face twisted, his handsome features warping into something monstrous. He lunged at her, but the charm glowed brightly, and he fell back, his body crumbling like ash. As the charm's light faded, Chima disappeared, leaving only a faint shadow on the ground. Adaeze collapsed, exhausted but free. The king slowly recovered, though he was never quite the same. Chima's influence lingered in the palace for a long time, a reminder of the dark days we had endured. To this day, we tell this story to remind ourselves to be cautious of those who seem too perfect, too powerful. Because sometimes, they are hiding secrets we are not meant to understand. And sometimes, they want more than just our loyalty, they want our very souls.